welcome to the Environmental Psychology podcast. I'm your host, Traci. I'm the communications officer for this research department at the Faculty of Behavioral and Social Sciences at the University of Groningen. And the goal of this podcast is to share a little bit more of the research that's being done by this group and share with people more insights about how behavior change can play a role in minimizing the impact of climate change, among lots of other things. And my guest today is Associate Professor Goda Perlaviciute. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yes. First things first, we've asked you to bring a plant with you to tell us about it, because everybody in this department, likes plants and green things and cares about nature, understandably. So we've got your plants. So why did you choose to bring this plant?
Well, I must say I did not have the luxury of choice. Talking about people who I like plants, but I'm not particularly good in taking care of them, especially at the office. So I could have brought a bunch of plants who unfortunately did not survive when I just forget about them. Mm-hmm. But this one is special. Because it did survive. So this is the plant that I inherited from back then my master thesis supervisor, Linda, with whom I'm still working closely.
Oh, nice.
So it's been with me for more than 10 years.
Nice.
And it learned to be patient, and it learned to be not taken care of all the time, but at the same time loved very much at some moments.
Yeah, it is a different survival mode, the office plant versus the home plant. And it's been here for 10 years already. Is that how long you've been here in Groningen yourself, or have you been here longer than that?
Longer than that. At some point I just said, well, over 10 years, to be honest. I don't even know how long exactly that has been for now. I've defended my PhD thesis in 2016. Mm-hmm. So it means by then for 4 years I was already in Groningen. So you do the math, but it's been a long time.
Yeah, and you did your master's and your PhD here, and now you are an instructor and researcher in this department.
Yeah, I did all my career in Groningen.
Nice. So what is your research specialty?
So now it is about public acceptability of sustainable energy transitions. It has grown, of course, since my PhD. It has become broader, at the same time sometimes more focused. Public acceptability of sustainable energy transition. So basically, what do people think about different energy projects, different energy policies? How do we have to move away from fossil fuels to renewables? How do we deal with all the risks, but at the same time, how do we make sure that the climate goals are met with all the energy technologies that we have available at the moment?
Yeah, and what kinds of technologies do you focus on in particular? Is it a little bit of everything?
A wide spectrum, really. Yeah. Of course, it perhaps would be nice to focus on the greenest ones, right? On the most sustainable ones. At the same time, it looks like we need a whole spectrum of energy technologies still to meet our energy needs, and at the same time to go for the sustainable energy transition. And as a scientist, I find all different energy technologies interesting, because if some are more acceptable than others, then the question is, of course, why? And do people prefer fossil fuels or renewable energy sources, and when? And do they prefer the same sources if they just think about them hypothetically versus when it comes to their backyard? And again, what drives those perceptions? That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, and as you said about perceptions and acceptability, is there a difference between accepting a technology or accepting a process that's underway and participating in the process to get that going, or do they end up being the same thing, or are they quite different processes?
Very good question. I think you're hinting into public participation a little bit. You're building a nice bridge there. I think that's what you mean.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah. So one of the topics that I've been especially focused on in the last years is public engagement in decision making. So what you're saying, one thing is of course the energy source or energy project. Imagine we are going for more renewables. Perhaps we need more wind energy, so we need to build more wind turbines somewhere, perhaps in Groningen, perhaps somewhere else in the Netherlands. So that's one thing, right? What do we think about wind? What do we think about concrete projects? What are the costs? What are the benefits? But the other thing that we know has impact on public acceptability is indeed how the decisions are being taken. So who decides about, do we need wind, how much, where, what type of wind turbines we're going to build, when, and so on and so forth. And that is all the decision-making process. And the question that I'm particularly interested in is to what extent citizens themselves get to play a role in that decision-making process. And second, how that translates into public acceptability. So does that have an effect on eventually what people think about the project?
And is it common as of now for the public to be involved in these processes, and at what stage?
It's more and more common. So it's public participation is really becoming a buzzword from what I've seen in the last years. So there seems to be some kind of a partly common understanding that the traditional top-down approach, when the government decides or the industry decides, they call it also decide, announce, defend approach. So government, industry decide, they announce it to the public, and they defend in a sense, they explain why this is a good idea, right? So there has been a sort of increasing understanding that this might not be the best recipe for ensuring public support, because when citizens feel that decisions have been taken behind their back or behind closed doors, right, and perhaps their interests, their values have not been considered enough, that can be a route to resistance. So people feel uncomfortable with that, and they want to be better represented in decision making. And one way to do that is to engage the public themselves in decision making. And the idea has gained a lot of interest lately from science and practice, especially in the fields of energy transition and more generally climate transition. Yeah. So there's a lot of experimenting going on, and there's a lot of increasingly more research into it.
Yeah, including research that you're working on. So the current approach, or the traditional approach, has been to sort of ask for forgiveness rather than asking for permission from the general public.
Yeah, asking for understanding and
Yeah, and is the fact that we're in the midst of this energy transition, does that is that an opportunity to reconsider how democratic this process is, or is that just coincidentally happening at the same time?
That's a good question. It's sort of become a must in the energy transition because of seeing that sometimes it just doesn't work. The top-down approach that we talked about, and that calls for alternatives. And public participation is one alternative, and at the same time, while they support each other, in energy transition provides a very interesting case study to further experiment with it. And public participation in turn provides an alternative route to perhaps co-decide, think together about what we want, rather than, as you said, ask for forgiveness later.
Yeah. And what has your research found about what motivates people to get involved in these public processes, and is it usually in the setting of a town hall, or what sorts of formats do these moments for people to provide their thoughts on a proposed project, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I've looked at different forms and also at different levels of decision making, including very concrete energy projects like wind energy projects around Groningen, and at the very abstract level. So, for example, the National Citizen Assembly, the National Dutch Citizen Assembly on energy futures. So, what kind of energy futures do we want on a national scale? And in the research that I lead, we sort of take a more critical look into public participation. So there are of course nice ideas behind public participation, why it is being done. At the same time, it has also become sort of a silver bullet. So if there's a resistance, what we have to do is to invite people to participate, and then it will miraculously all solve itself, and people will be happy and they will accept the project. And I thought, well, it is given that it's so important now, so coming in a way, it is important to look at indeed what actually motivates people to participate, and if you just invite people, who is going to come, and whom will you have in the room, how will people interact, and at the end what the outcomes of that participatory process is. And you asked who participates. So I think indeed there is this normative idea, as long as we give people their right to participate, they will exercise this right, because of course what else people want to do in a daily life than participate in decision making about
waiting.
Exactly. Everyone cannot wait until they can go to a town hall meeting.
But the people who are waiting for that opportunity usually have a stronger opinion either way, and they're not necessarily there to be convinced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what we found in public participation around wind projects, that especially people who feel more negatively towards the project, they're more likely to participate. And I'm not saying that is a problem in itself, because if public participation is about creating better projects or taking away the concerns that people have, or at least knowing about which concerns people have, you could say it's not necessarily a problem. At the same time, I think it's very important to be aware of this, because as a policymaker or as a project developer, you have to know what you're doing when you're inviting people to participate. So perhaps the people who are there are indeed more likely to be opponents. That doesn't mean yet that everyone in the region are against the wind energy project. So if you want to hear the concerns, invite people to participate in a town hall meeting. But if you want to at the same time know, okay, but what do people in general, what the community thinks, perhaps you want to think of parallel forms of public participation, perhaps surveys, other ways to get a more representative sample of the local community.
Yeah, and one way that you have also been doing research on, and you mentioned it earlier, was citizen assemblies, and that it's serving a similar purpose of letting people have their voices and values heard, but can you explain how it's different from the normal process of randomly announcing it and then just seeing what happens?
Yeah, so citizen assemblies is a very interesting development that has also gained a lot of popularity lately. So the governments all around Europe, those citizen assemblies are just popping up everywhere now. I have an idea. What is the difference between what you call the normal town hall meeting? The citizen assemblies, they work with what they call a democratic lottery. So the idea is indeed, if you simply invite people to participate, you may have to deal with usual suspects. We just talked about opponents, perhaps people who are most against, but we also see in public participation process that oftentimes you mostly have privileged people, then relatively more highly educated with higher income. So people who have the confidence to speak up and have the time and the skills perhaps to come and speak up about to talk about their opinions about the project. And that's not the ideal for public participation, because one of the ideas is that you get different perspectives, right? And that you represent citizens. So citizen assemblies, they work with the democratic lottery, meaning that they invite people who would like to participate, but even if you want to participate, you have to be drawn by lottery. So from the pool of people who want to participate, they will use a lottery to select a sample I call it, a group, which is usually 150 people if it's a national assembly, a small group that will represent the general population. Sometimes they call it also, for example, if it's in the Netherlands, they call it mini Netherlands in a room, right? So you will have, percentage-wise, you will have a comparable proportion of the population. So if we have 45% women in a population, we will also have 45% women among those 150. If we have, and we will have similar distribution of different societal groups. That's what they strive for. As much as
and political
possible.
backgrounds as well, or different sorts of values. Is that something that's part of the criteria?
It differs. I would say demographic criteria are usually the basis. So gender, income, education. What we did in the Dutch National Assembly, political attitude as well. And for example, in the National Assembly in the UK on climate, they also indeed took quotas based on climate change perceptions. And you could do that, of course, for values, right? Super interesting to get not only people with different demographic characteristics, but also relate with different views on the world and what is important. Yeah,
but I mean, does that require people having kind of an understanding of what the different kinds of values are to start with? Like, would you give people a list and say, what are the things that you find important? Then you'd tell them, like a quiz, like, congratulations, you have biospheric values. Or how aware are people of being able to sort of say, oh, these are my values as they relate to climate?
Yeah, so we do a lot of research on values, because that's, and you mentioned biospheric values, we also call them the green values for maybe outside our ivory tower. So there are ways to measure it, and very briefly we work with 4 types of values, and I will also use the same labels that we actually used in the Citizen Assembly to hopefully make them clear. So the green values, so people care about nature, the environment. The pleasure values, what we call them, a scientific term was hedonic values. So people care about their comfort, everyday pleasure. Then we have the self values. It all has to do with your personal resources, which could be money, but it could be education, it could be ambition, status. And altruistic pro-social values, so caring about other people, future generations, right? And we can measure those values. So people, of course, we can, in the actual assembly, we also did, in the Dutch assembly, we talked about those values. But let's say if you want to select people based on values, we indeed have some smart questions that can give us an indication how important those values are to you. And I often get a question, so how many pleasure seekers are there in the Netherlands, and how many environmentalists are there in the Netherlands, or even better in Groningen, or specific neighborhood in Groningen where I want to build my wind turbine.
Yes, tell me exactly how people are going to respond to this.
Exactly. It's not how the value theory works. So it was developed based on the very general needs and priorities that people have. Most of us find all these values relatively important, and there are individual differences in how you perhaps prioritize those values. One might find green values somewhat more important than pleasure values or the other way around. But
you're not just one kind of value.
no, I could not put you in a green box or in a, well, we don't have the colors. I don't know what the color would be for the pleasure box. No, that's not how it works.
That's the next step.
Yeah.
And what was the outcome of the Citizens Assembly for Energy here in the Netherlands? How did that process go?
So the Dutch Citizen Assembly on energy was really a pioneer in the value approach. So what we did there, we tried to get people to talk about what they value in life, what is important to them. So if you compare it with other citizen assemblies in the UK, for example, or maybe the famous example, the French Citizen Assembly after the Yellow Vests movement, what they did there was to ask people come up with climate mitigation measures, or basically what should we do as a government to reduce CO2 emissions by 2040 by a certain percentage compared to 50 years ago or so. And then I think you have citizens in a room, you have people who will be faced with whatever choices we make in their daily lives. We specifically ask citizens and not experts, not technical experts. So why do we now ask citizens to come up with very specific measures, with very specific calculations, with very specific technical solutions for sustainable transition? I thought if we have citizens, let's talk them about the expertise that they really have, their values. And that's what we did in the Dutch Citizen Assembly. So of course we sort of gave lectures. People also could choose what they want to hear about sustainable transition. So they had the basis, right? What we need, where we stand. But instead of asking how much wind or geothermal or solar or nuclear energy should we have, we asked them, what are the key priorities for you? What are the conditions? What is for you the most important when we talk about the sustainable energy transition? What are for you the absolute no-goes? And what do you really want to see there? And at the end, I'm now afraid to say, I think there were 25 recommendations coming out of that citizen assemblies, from that citizen assembly, focused on their values, such as fairness. Do not burden more the low-income families than the burden that they're already carrying, or think about people who rent their homes and who do not owe them. What kind of choices do they have? How can you enable them to contribute to the sustainable energy transition? Those are the things that came up from the group.
Yeah, and then after these value statements were sort of formulated, what happens after that? I guess it also varies from one country to the next, but in the Netherlands, I would assume people would think, okay, these are being given to the government. What does the government do with those propositions? Yeah.
As you know, we are quite in a turbulent time with the
there's government. Technically no government right now.
Exactly. So I think this is the most difficult time to answer the question. The Citizen Assembly was then at that time also organized on behalf of in that time the Minister for Finances and Climate, and he received the recommendations. And at the moment, I think it is really impossible to say what will happen. While it is an important question, we are coming back to public participation, right? And the effectiveness of public participation. One thing that determines how effective public participation is the mandate.
Yeah.
So what can people actually achieve by participating? And if you just ask people to participate and they invest time in it and you get their input, but you're not going to do anything with it. Yeah. That's also what is sometimes called fake participation. And then I would almost say, well, perhaps better not than that.
Yeah, because it's asking even more of people to participate in something like that than a town hall where they may already assume this is a foregone conclusion, this is going to happen. But I can imagine in that position that people feel, well, I put all this effort into it anyway, and then nothing is being done with it. And I guess trust in the process
that can be very frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly unique in the Netherlands at this point, but cabinet formation is a recurring issue at the moment with the coalition approach. Yeah, so to be continued, hopefully, I guess, when there is a new government in place to see what they do with the outcome of the assembly.
Yeah, and with a critical note on public participation, that it can be a very promising way to integrate better the perspective, but you have to think about how do you invite people, who will come, how do you talk with them, what do you want to know from the public, and at the end, what are you going to do with the input that comes in?
Yeah. And in addition to your research here, as an extension of your research here, you are also one of the co-founders of another organization here in Groningen called the Public Participation Center. The name implies, to a certain extent, what the center is about, but what does it do specifically, and why was it founded?
So, when I started this research, I thought psychology is very important for public participation, right? That when we think about public participation, we have to understand how people think, and we need psychology, of course. And I was very proud as a psychologist to start working on that topic. At some point, the research has become interdisciplinary. So I started working with law, which is also, of course, very important, because you can, as a psychologist, you can think of all nice ways how people would like to participate, but you need lawyers to put that into regulations and to give it a legal framework of how the public participation should look like. So what we have now in the Netherlands with a environmental law, which also mandates public participation, right? You need some kind of legal framework to regulate it. And that was already for us revolutionary then, to have these two disciplines working together on public participation. And well, it didn't last long until we realized, okay, this is still a very small part of the whole puzzle that we are addressing. And if you really want to study public participation in a proper, complete way, ideally, you would also have political sciences, you would have philosophy, you would have technical sciences that look at energy transition at such, and how that could be brought in public participation. You need many, many other disciplines. And that's how the idea came about to establish the Public Participation Center, where we bring different disciplines together, people from different disciplines who work on public participation, and that's how we move to new questions like digital participation. How do we deal with that?
So having that interdisciplinary approach is necessary because of the complexity of the different steps of the process. And do you find that also to be a beneficial approach for climate research more generally, that having an interdisciplinary approach is necessary because of the scale of the challenge?
Absolutely, and that's I think what we are all convinced in Groningen, and we work very actively on that, and connecting disciplines and learning from each other. And it's a big puzzle that can only be answered with people from different disciplines, but also from different sectors, science, policy making, industry, companies, non-governmental organizations, citizens. Only that's how you can address that. Such a big challenge.
Yeah. That's almost all the time we have, but I have one final question. You may have even already addressed it sort of in your previous remark, but is there any one thing in particular that you would like more people to understand about the field of environmental psychology specifically? Good, simple, straightforward question. Yeah,
it's straightforward, but it's not. It's not simple at all. Well, environmental psychology looks at one of the most serious challenges in the climate, energy, sustainability transition, the human perspective. what do people want and what do people not want, and how do they perceive climate change and how that affects their willingness to act. What do they think about policies? I think that's oftentimes remains a blind spot, without which, of course, you can never develop any effective climate policy.
Yeah, because you can have the policy, you can have the technology, but if people
don't have
aren't
public
using
support,
yeah. Okay, I think that's a nice summary of a very expansive subject.
Well, I hope I did some justice to the field.
Absolutely, very much so. Yeah, that's all the questions I had. Yeah, thank you so much for your time and for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yay.